You've probably met it, the man who carries the family like a spine, and the moment he shows discipline, boundaries, or responsibility, people immediately reach for a weapon word: patriarchy. Even when his behavior is built from protection, sacrifice, and restraint, the label arrives like a verdict. And here's the uncomfortable part. Most people aren't using that word to analyze behavior. They're using it to avoid thinking. They're using it to shut down accountability, rename their discomfort, and call it justice. So today we're going to talk about one word, not as a slogan, as a psychology problem, as an identity trigger, as a social shortcut that lets people feel righteous without doing the hard work of understanding what's actually happening in real households, real marriages, real finances, and real fear. Welcome to the hidden self, where the truth is not polite and where we refuse to flatter the stories you tell yourself. Let's start with the simplest question. Why do people fear the idea of a leader in a family so much that they need to contaminate the word until it tastes poisonous? Because if you truly believe leadership equals oppression, then you get to stop looking at your own patterns. You don't have to ask why the same people who claim to be against power still crave control. You don't have to ask why the loudest critics of patriarchy often benefit from chaos, indecision, and emotional bargaining. You don't have to ask why so many relationships collapse the moment structure appears. You can call it old thinking all you want, but most of the time it's not old thinking. It's old conditioning, it's trauma, it's resentment. It's the mind's way of turning pain into a political identity. And once a label becomes identity, it stops being about truth. It becomes about belonging. So let's open the word itself. Not the way social media uses it, but the way language originally carried it. In older East Asian moral frameworks, especially within Confucian thought, the concept behind family head wasn't designed to crown a tyrant. It was designed to assign responsibility to someone stable enough to hold the household together. The word you're translating as head doesn't mean winner. It means the one who carries. There's a reason the idea of an orderly family structure appeared in moral philosophy. People didn't grow up believing survival was a game of pure individual freedom. They understood that when nobody takes responsibility, the family does not become free. It becomes unsafe. It becomes fragmented. It becomes each person fighting for their own comfort while ignoring the long-term consequences. In Confucian logic, morality is not abstract. It's modeled through roles. If the person above behaves with integrity, the people below are more likely to align. Not because they are forced, but because they are guided. And guidance requires someone to act. It requires decisions. It requires limits. Now, modern life loves to pretend that every leadership dynamic is the same. It loves to flatten all distinctions. It loves the bright simplicity of all patriarchy is abuse. But that is not analysis. That is a personality defense mechanism. When you smear the concept, you don't have to distinguish between a man who uses force and a man who uses responsibility. You don't have to separate brutality from boundaries. You don't have to ask whether the strict father was harming the children or whether he was teaching them reality. In real households, the difference is not theoretical. It's visible in details. A controlling man punishes disagreement. A responsible man plans for risk. A tyrant uses anger to intimidate. A leader uses consequences to protect the future. A bully humiliates. A caregiver sets rules without needing to dominate. But the moment you say patriarchy, the way social media wants it said, you're not encouraged to see details. You're encouraged to see stereotypes. You're encouraged to stop thinking like an adult and start thinking like a faction. Now let's go deeper, because labels don't get popular by accident. The reason the patriarchy label spreads so quickly is because it offers three psychological reliefs. First, it gives people a moral shortcut. Instead of asking, did this man hurt me in specific ways, or did he enforce boundaries, you can ask, what category is he in? Categories feel clean. Categories feel certain. Categories feel safe. Second, it protects people from disappointment. If your relationship struggles are caused by your own choices, your own tolerance of dysfunction, your own avoidance of hard conversations, then you would have to face yourself. But if the problem is patriarchy, then you can keep your internal narrative intact. You can stay the hero. You can keep your identity pure. Third, it gives people a way to avoid responsibility for outcomes. When couples fight about money, chores, or future planning, the real problem might be communication. It might be fear. It might be lack of skills. It might be resentment. It might be poor emotional regulation. But patriarchy turns complex conflict into a villain story, and villain stories are emotionally convenient. They keep the mind from learning. So what does patriarchy usually get used to cover? It often covers a confusion between two very different things: leadership rooted in accountability versus control rooted in insecurity. Let's start with the version people don't want to talk about. There is a kind of family head that doesn't feel like domination at all. It feels like gravity. It feels like someone willing to be accountable when life becomes heavy. A real leader doesn't pass the consequences to others. When a decision leads to risk, he doesn't hide behind "I'm just following." He owns it. He sits in the discomfort. He absorbs blame so the household doesn't fracture. You've seen this. Maybe you didn't name it, but you've seen it. It's the man who doesn't brag, but quietly handles the bills. It's the one who takes overtime shifts without turning it into a performance. It's the one who doesn't run away from difficult conversations because he understands that love without responsibility becomes negligence. In many families, the weak men are not the ones society expects. The weak ones are the ones who avoid deciding, avoid accountability, and avoid being the adult in the room. They outsource their role to whoever is most compliant or most emotionally reactive. And when the competent person finally takes responsibility, everyone calls it oppression because they would rather punish responsibility than grow up. Now, I want you to notice something. The word patriarchy often gets attached to any moment a man stops negotiating endlessly. If a husband says, "This week we can't buy that," some people hear "you're not allowed." But often it's "we can't afford it, and I'm preventing a future problem." If a father says, "We are leaving at this time," people hear "I'm controlling you." But sometimes it's "I'm keeping the kids safe and preventing chaos." The psychology here is important. When people have been trained to interpret firmness as threat, they will misread leadership as violence. And the tragedy is that once you misread leadership as violence, you start rewarding avoidance. You start rewarding emotional chaos. You start praising the kind of easygoing person who never sets boundaries, never plans, never corrects behavior, and never repairs the damage. Society likes to criticize men for being irresponsible, but it also quietly rewards irresponsibility as being chill. The irresponsible man gets called relaxed. The responsible man gets called patriarchal. That's a cultural inversion, and that inversion is how families break. Now, let's talk about the second piece that defines true leadership in a family. Principles, not rigidity, principles. A home without principles becomes a marketplace where each person negotiates based on mood. If a family has no shared rules, then every day becomes a fight about whatever someone wants right now. Kids learn that adults are inconsistent. Partners learn that promises are flexible. Money becomes a battlefield. Boundaries become optional. In that environment, freedom is just another word for unmanaged impulses. So what does a responsible family head do? He builds a framework: time discipline, respect for elders, standards for school, limits on risk, rules around alcohol, gambling, and behavior that harms the household. He might sound strict, but strictness with purpose is a form of care. This is where the label system becomes dishonest, because people confuse emotional comfort with moral safety. They think if it feels controlling, it must be harmful. But sometimes the discomfort is the price of stability. There's a reason so many high performers across cultures credit early discipline with their later resilience. Not because discipline is fun, because discipline teaches the mind that consequences exist. It teaches self-control before life forces it. Now, yes, strict fathers can be unfair. Yes, rules can be used as weapons. Yes, some men use authority to humiliate. That exists. But you don't need to erase the entire concept to survive those experiences. You can name abuse without destroying every healthy form of responsibility. If you cannot separate the two, you aren't protecting victims. You're generalizing from pain until it becomes ideology, and ideology doesn't heal, it hardens. Now let's push into the third, and this is where things get real. Sacrifice. True family leadership is not the performance of power. It is the quiet surrender of personal comfort for the survival of something bigger. A selfish man cannot do this for long. He might pretend, he might buy things, he might even provide money. But if he can't delay his cravings, if he can't withstand discomfort, if he can't tolerate being the one who takes the hardest emotional hits, then he cannot carry a family. He becomes another child in the house. Sacrifice shows up differently. It shows up when he chooses fewer pleasures, so the family has steadier finances, when he chooses sleep over arguments, when he chooses quiet reliability over dramatic romance. And yes, that can look less loving from the outside, especially to people trained by movies and social media to equate love with constant emotional display. But love isn't only poetry. Love is logistics. Love is planning. Love is preventing disaster. A man who doesn't chase attention can still be deeply affectionate. His affection can live in the way he ensures safety, in the way he handles emergencies, in the way he stays when it would be easier to run. This is a painful point for viewers who were disappointed in a partner. Sometimes you want your partner to express love with words and gestures, but a responsible man might express love through effort and restraint. And if you refuse to recognize that, you end up demanding the wrong currency. Then you call him cold, you call him patriarchal, you call him unromantic. Meanwhile, he is paying for your stability with his own private discomfort. There are countless micro stories like this in ordinary life. A husband works nights so his wife can sleep. Then he comes home tired and doesn't have the energy for conversation. The wife feels rejected. She doesn't recognize sacrifice. She interprets exhaustion as lack of love. A father travels far for work for years. He isn't present during holidays. The child eventually remembers the empty seat, not the reason behind it. Later, the child realizes the father's absence was not abandonment, but the attempt to secure a future. A man does exhausting work and rarely buys himself anything. He doesn't post it. He doesn't perform it. He simply does it. But social media teaches people to trust performance. If it isn't displayed, it feels non-existent. So sacrifice gets erased and replaced by a narrative of oppression. That narrative feels powerful. It makes you the victim of someone else's power, but it doesn't bring you back the time you wish you had. Real healing requires seeing the full picture, not just the part that hurts. Now, the fourth thing, saying no. Healthy leadership includes the ability to refuse temptation. It includes the ability to say no when your desires would damage the household. Many people think saying no is a sign of weakness. Like if you don't flex your freedom, you're controlling. But that's not how maturity works. Saying no is a skill. It protects the future. A responsible father says no to late nights when it harms children's health and discipline. A responsible husband says no to overspending when money becomes debt. A responsible man says no to affairs when desire threatens the stability you've built. And outsiders often call this controlling. They hear the firmness, not the reason. They also misunderstand ethics. Some people treat ethics as a negotiation with their emotions. If the other person wants something, ethics must bend. If your impulse is strong, restraint must be oppression. That's not morality. That's impulse worship. Now, the painful truth is that many people don't actually want restraint in their partners. They want permission. They want to do what they want with minimal consequences. They want the comfort of not being the bad guy. So when a man refuses, the easiest way to process your own disappointment is to label the refusal as tyranny. That's why the label system is so effective. It turns rejection into proof. If he says no, he's patriarchal. If he sets boundaries, he's controlling. If he insists on values, he's old-fashioned. But again, we have to be precise. The issue is not the existence of boundaries. The issue is how boundaries are enforced. A protective boundary comes with calm, accountability, and respect. A controlling boundary comes with humiliation, threats, retaliation, and lack of transparency. One creates safety, the other creates fear. So if you feel fear around your partner's decisions, that's a different conversation. If you feel secure but annoyed by rules, you might just be dealing with the discomfort of structure. The words sound similar, the emotional reality isn't. Now let's confront a fifth, deeper layer, and it's the part most people avoid because it makes them uncomfortable. Mislabeling leadership is often a way to protect your own identity. For men, some misunderstand patriarchy as permission. They interpret men are leaders as men are allowed to ignore. They use the language of responsibility as a mask for arrogance. They use "I'm the head" as a justification for treating their wife like a subordinate. They don't want responsibility, they want dominance. That version exists, and it is ugly. But here's what most critics do incorrectly. They use the ugly version to attack the entire concept of responsibility. So every strict man becomes suspect, every principle becomes coercion, every leader becomes the same villain, and then women are taught to be suspicious of any man who takes a stand. That makes women safer from abuse, theoretically, but it also makes them less able to trust stability. It can push them into partnerships where nobody leads, where decisions are emotional, where chaos is treated as romance. And that's how freedom becomes another cage. For women, there's another trap. After experiencing an authoritarian partner, some women develop a blanket disgust response. They start calling any firmness patriarchy, even when it's healthy. They might even avoid men who are capable and stable because stability feels threatening when you're used to chaos. Then you wonder why your life repeats the same patterns, because the mind seeks familiarity. It may hate the pain, but it recognizes the structure of the pain. You might claim you want equality, but you might actually desire unpredictability because unpredictability feels alive after trauma. That's not logic, that's nervous system training. So equality becomes a debate slogan while the body keeps choosing the familiar emotional storm. Now, let's talk about the bigger cultural shift. Social media has trained everyone to treat anger as evidence and certainty as virtue. If you speak aggressively, it sounds like courage. If you sound offended, it sounds like justice. If you use a category word like patriarchy, it feels like intelligence. But the mind doesn't become wiser through slogans, it becomes less accurate. When the word patriarchy becomes a hammer, every person becomes a nail. You stop asking, what exactly did he do? You stop asking, what were the outcomes? You stop asking, did he protect or did he control? You stop asking, was he accountable or was he hiding behind authority? Instead, you ask, what does the category say? And category thinking is the enemy of adult relationships. Now I want you to consider something that might ruin the comfortable narrative. A responsible man does not need to announce power. He doesn't need to win arguments to prove dominance. His leadership is quiet. It shows up when problems arise. When money is missing, he doesn't lash out. He investigates and fixes systems. When a child is struggling, he doesn't deny reality. He sets plans. When conflict happens, he doesn't escalate to humiliation. He negotiates with boundaries. So his voice might not even be loud. He might speak calmly. He might even be reserved. Yet everyone can feel the steadiness. That kind of man is dangerous to shallow narratives because he doesn't fit the stereotype. So stereotypes are what the label protects. Now you might be thinking, what about extreme feminism or extremist activism? Doesn't that also distort things? Yes. Sometimes the battle against patriarchy becomes a way to justify rage and dehumanize men. Sometimes it turns into a moral entertainment industry. People crave enemies because enemies make identity easy. They can blame someone else without changing their own emotional patterns. And in those spaces, nuance is punished. People learn to be less accurate because accuracy would risk weakening the faction story. That's why this topic matters for your personal life, not just politics. Because the language you adopt will shape what you tolerate. It will shape who you trust. It will shape how you interpret your partner's choices. It will shape whether you see love as responsibility or you see responsibility as danger. Now, let's correct the confusion with one hard distinction. A tyrant rules by intimidation. A leader carries by commitment. A